I came home to find my entire side yard fenced off and a bulldozer parked where my apple trees used to be. There was a bright yellow sign zip-tied to the gate, "Future site of Stonebrook Community Pool." Except that wasn't community land, that was my land. I bought that place with Elaine back when we still believed in fresh starts. She was just coming off chemo. I was burned out from working 80-hour weeks mapping flood zones for a firm that didn't care if you drowned so long as the contract cleared. We were both done with cities, done with hospitals, done with the kind of stress that made you forget why you even got married in the first place. Stonebrook felt like the reset button we'd been looking for. It was quiet, clean. You could hear birds in the morning instead of sirens. The house itself wasn't much back then, just a boxy ranch with worn-out siding and a cracked driveway, but the lot was something else. Big corner lot, wide side yard that caught the evening sun, and an old apple tree that leaned just enough to look like it was guarding the place. I remember the first time we stepped into that backyard. Elaine stood there in the tall grass, arms crossed, staring at that slope like she was picturing something. She turned to me and said, "This is where we start growing things again." It was the first time she smiled without faking it in months. That alone made it worth every dollar. Over the years, we turned that slice of dirt into something that actually felt alive. I built a little pergola with cedar posts I'd salvaged from a teardown in Boulder, ran drip irrigation, planted native grasses, lavender, a pair of birch trees. It wasn't fancy, just honest. Every stone in the pathway I'd laid by hand. Every detail had a reason. That land mattered to me more than the house ever did. And as far as I knew, it was mine. It came with the deed. It was on the survey. It was in the closing docs. The property line was set just past the slope where I'd planted low juniper as a natural barrier. I remember double-checking it before I built the pergola, just to avoid any future headaches. It was mine the way a man knows his own boots are his. When we first moved in, there wasn't even a real HOA to speak of. Just a couple of neighbors who pooled money to keep the entrance sign from rotting and maybe organize a holiday BBQ. It wasn't until Laurel Jennings showed up that things got formal. She moved in across the street, started talking about community identity and preserving home values. Within 6 months, we had official meetings, printed newsletters, and by the end of the year, a full board with Laurel as president. At first, it didn't bother me. I mostly ignored it. We kept our heads down, kept to ourselves. I figured as long as we paid the occasional fee and didn't paint our house neon green, we'd be left alone. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first time Laurel knocked on my door, I actually felt kind of bad for her. She was holding this oversized binder to her chest like a Bible, smiling way too hard, standing there in her wedge heels on my uneven front steps like she was afraid the dirt might bite her. "Oh, hey, Tom," she said like we were old pals. "Just wanted to give you a quick heads up. Looks like there's been a small boundary issue flagged in our property alignment review." Now, I had no idea what a property alignment review even was. Sounded like something you'd do to your tires. She flipped open her binder and pulled out this map printed on a glossy HOA letterhead. The kind of map that looked like it had been run through 3 different PDFs and printed crooked. The property lines were drawn with a thick red marker, and I could already tell before she said a word. The line didn't match mine. "We just noticed," she said, tapping the edge of the page with her pinky, "that the slope along your side yard might actually fall within the common use easement. Nothing major, just something to be aware of before spring landscaping begins." I stared at her for a second and tried not to laugh. That slope? The same slope I'd planted, watered, and mulched for a decade? The one with the birches I damn near broke my back digging in? The pergola? The flagstone path? "That's my land," I said. "Came with the house. You can check the plat. It's all recorded." She nodded like that didn't really matter. "Oh, totally," she said, with that tight-lipped corporate smile. "We just want to make sure everyone's aligned moving forward. You know, for consistency." Then she handed me an official-looking letter. "Just a courtesy notice," she said. "No action needed yet." Yet. I didn't even open it right away. I watched her walk back across the street in her little power strut and disappear into her garage, where she'd pasted the HOA seal on her trash cans. Dead serious. Actual gold-embossed stickers with Stonebrook Valley Estates, board member, like we were living in some kind of suburban monarchy. When I finally read the letter, it said something about encroachment into HOA-managed slope buffer zones and a pending clarification request with the county recorder. It wasn't demanding anything, not yet, but it was clear what it was, a shot across the bow. Elaine, who's got sharper instincts for people than I do, took one look at the letter and said, "She's testing you." I figured it'd blow over. Maybe she just wanted to feel important. I didn't think for a second they'd actually act on it. That was my mistake. I started noticing the flags first. Little orange surveyor flags poked into the ground right along the slope behind my birches. At first, I figured maybe the utility company had something scheduled. Happens all the time. But then I saw the white spray paint, a line running straight across the edge of my yard like someone was planning a highway through it. Next day, I come home from the grocery store and there's a guy in a neon vest walking through my grass with what looked like a blueprint tube and a tripod. I walked over and asked what he was doing. He looked up like I was the interruption and said, "Site prep. Pool expansion." I laughed. I actually laughed. Thought he was joking. "No, seriously," I said. "On whose land?" He pulled out a clipboard and squinted. "HOA property. Parcel extension approved." "Show me." He didn't have to. I already knew. Laurel had pushed that boundary issue straight into action, and now somehow the HOA believed they owned part of my yard. I didn't yell at the guy. Wasn't his fault. I just told him politely to get off my land, and I followed up by emailing Laurel directly. A short message. "There's been a mistake. That's my property. I expect the flags removed and no further intrusion." She didn't reply. Instead, 2 days later, a crew showed up with fencing. Temporary construction barriers, the orange mesh kind that sag after a week and make everything look like a condemned playground. They wrapped the entire side of my yard, and left a laminated sign zip-tied to one of the posts. Future site of Stonebrook Community Pool, Phase 2. I lost it. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I called Miguel Alvarez, the name on the construction sign. He told me everything was cleared by HOA and he had no legal reason to stop work. So I walked across the street. Laurel opened the door like she'd been waiting for me, standing there in a button-down blouse and pearls like she was running a city council campaign from her kitchen. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. I kept my voice level. "You need to stop whatever you think you're doing on my property." She raised an eyebrow like I'd just mispronounced my own name. "Tom," she said, "we've reviewed the revised boundaries. Everything we're doing falls within the shared use parcel designated in the updated site plan." I told her I had the original survey, the deed, the legal lot description, all of it. She didn't flinch. "I'm sure you believe that," she said, "but we've already submitted our plan to the county, and until we hear otherwise, construction is proceeding." She didn't slam the door. She just slowly, calmly closed it in my face. I stood there for a solid minute, hand still on the railing. Then I turned around and saw a neighbor across the street watching from their porch. They looked away as soon as I caught their eye. The next morning, I woke up to a yellow HOA violation notice duct taped to my front door. Obstruction of authorized construction. Cease and desist immediately. No signature, just that damn embossed seal again. That afternoon, I tried talking to the workers again, told them there was a legal dispute and I had documentation. One guy shrugged. Another muttered something about just following orders. I asked to see Miguel. He wasn't on site. So I did what any sane person would do. I walked onto my own property and started pulling up the fencing. Not destroying it, just moving it. One post out of the ground at a time. I'd gotten through maybe 4 before a police cruiser rolled up, lights on, but no siren. Officer Kemp. He stepped out like he was on a coffee run, not a call. Slow walk, sunglasses on, hand resting just near his belt like this was a scene from some budget TV drama. "Got a call about a disturbance," he said. "Construction conflict." I told him the land was mine. I had the deed, the survey, the whole packet sitting in my kitchen. I invited him to come inside and take a look. He said, "That's not really my lane, sir. This sounds like a civil dispute, but I do need you to stop interfering with the crew. They've got authorization from the HOA. I stood there, sweaty and dirt-covered, trying to process that. "I'm the homeowner," I said. "They're building a pool on my land." "Then I suggest you take it up with your HOA board," he said. "But for now, if you don't step back, I'll have to write you up for obstruction." I backed off, didn't say another word, just walked inside and closed the door. Elaine was waiting at the table, already pulling the old file boxes out from under the stairs. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "We need to find every piece of paper." The war had started, and I had no idea how ugly it was about to get. I spent the next 2 weeks doing everything the right way, the boring way, the way you're supposed to, even when every part of you wants to march back out there and chain yourself to a birch tree. I started with zoning, sat on hold for 45 minutes, finally got transferred to a guy named Kyle who sounded like he was eating a sandwich mid-sentence. Told him the situation, sent over my plat map, the deed, and the original survey with the county stamp. He said, "Okay, looks like we'll need to do a review of the parcel boundaries, might take some time." "How much time?" I asked. "Could be 30 days, could be 90, depends if we need a resurvey." I told him they were actively building on it. He said, "Yeah, we'll flag it for urgency," which is government code for "don't hold your breath." Next, I showed up at the next HOA meeting. They held it in the clubhouse rec room, the kind of beige multi-purpose space that smells like dust and stale donuts. Laurel sat at the head of the folding table with her binder open like she was chairing a UN summit. The rest of the board sat to her right, nodding along like bobbleheads on a dashboard. When they got to public comments, I stood up. I wasn't rude. I brought copies. I laid out the documentation, everything clearly labeled, my original deed, the survey from when we closed on the house, and the coordinate breakdown from the county GIS system. Laurel didn't even touch the papers. She just gave me that same polite little smile. "Thank you, Tom. We appreciate your concerns. As we've stated, we're working from the most up-to-date documentation available to the HOA and the county." "I've spoken to the county," I said. "They haven't approved your site plan. It's still under review." She nodded like I'd just confirmed her horoscope. "And until we hear otherwise, we're proceeding under the assumption that the revised parcel division is accurate." One of the board members, Mark something, tried to chime in, looking a little unsure, but Laurel cut him off smoothly. "Tom, I understand this is emotional for you, but this land has always been a point of confusion, and we're finally bringing clarity to the neighborhood." I said, "Clarity doesn't usually come with bulldozers." That got a few awkward chuckles from the crowd, but not from the board. Laurel moved on like I hadn't spoken at all. And just like that, my 3-minute public comment was up. I walked out of there ready to punch drywall. But Elaine, bless her, had other ideas. She reached out to Jamie Lynn, a neighbor 2 houses down, who used to work in real estate law. Jamie's smart, practical, and not easily intimidated. She agreed to take a look at everything, just to confirm we weren't crazy. When she saw the boundary documents, she frowned. "These are solid. The legal description is airtight. Whatever Laurel's using, it's not from the recorder's office." Jamie filed a formal inquiry with the title company, just to create a paper trail. Meanwhile, Miguel's crew kept working. They'd moved on to trenching now. I came home one afternoon and found the irrigation lines I'd laid by hand 5 years ago sliced in half and coiled up like garbage. No warning. No apology. I called Miguel, told him I had a legal dispute pending and he needed to pause the work. He told me, and I quote, "I take orders from the board, not from homeowners. If they say dig, we dig." I called the cops again. I figured maybe a different officer might see things differently. Nope. Same guy. Officer Kemp showed up like he was late for dinner, leaned on my fence post like it owed him money, and told me, again, that this was a civil issue and to stop wasting department time. "They're damaging my property," I said. "Isn't that vandalism?" He shook his head. "They say it's not your property, and I'm not a judge. Take it up in court." Elaine started getting stress migraines again. Jamie said we might need to file an injunction, but that would mean going to court, hiring a lawyer, racking up fees. It was like standing at the bottom of a mountain you didn't even know you'd have to climb. And through it all, the work didn't stop. Every day I heard the beeping of equipment backing up. Every day more of my land got carved away like it never belonged to me. The worst part wasn't even the digging. It was the way the neighbors started avoiding us. People I used to chat with on weekend walks now just nodded and kept moving. I could feel it, the shift. Laurel had been whispering about us, about how we were holding back progress, overreacting, causing trouble. One morning, I opened the mailbox and found a flyer from the HOA, Future of Stonebrook, Community Pool and Unity Space, with a big fake rendering of smiling kids and beach umbrellas, photoshopped right onto my yard. I stood in the kitchen with the flyer in one hand and the irrigation tubing in the other, still muddy and broken. Elaine came over, looked at both, and just said, "They think you're going to give up." And honestly, for a second, I almost did. But then Jamie called. And what she found changed everything. Jamie called me late, way past the hour when polite people make calls. I was out back, sitting under what was left of the pergola, sipping a beer and staring at the fencing like it might back down if I just glared hard enough. When my phone rang and I saw her name, I picked up thinking she found some extra clause or city permit I could use to at least slow things down. Instead, she just said, "You're going to want to see this in person." When I got to her house, she was already at the dining table with her laptop open and a stack of papers spread out like some kind of low-key command center. She looked fired up, eyes sharp, mouth tight, fingers tapping the table like they were keeping time for a band only she could hear. So I sat down. She flipped the screen toward me and said, "This is the parcel map Stonebrook HOA submitted with their community pool proposal." It looked familiar. Same sketchy layout I'd seen Laurel waving around. Same red parcel boundaries. Same fake line slicing through my yard. Then she opened a second window. "And this," she said, is the official parcel map the county recorder has on file, current, verified, and, more importantly, publicly stamped last year. It wasn't just different, it was night and day. My property line, according to the official record, cut way past the slope. Everything I'd built, the trees, the pergola, the path, the irrigation, all of it was within my boundary, not even close to a shared use zone. The HOA's version? Completely fabricated, not just misaligned, doctored. Jamie clicked a third window. This is the metadata from the file they submitted, she said. They used a draft overlay, not the official GIS source. The draft was from a community planning session, a mock-up from a private consultant the HOA hired 2 years ago. It wasn't even a finalized map, and it was never filed. Wait, I said. They submitted a mock-up as legal documentation? She nodded. They took a conceptual map, stripped the draft watermark, and refiled it with the county planning office for site approval, and no one double-checked it because it came through under the HOA's internal routing code, which, by the way, Laurel personally controls. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. But she wasn't done. I ran the parcel ID through the recorder's archive search. Look at this. She slid a copy of an old plat document across the table. It was a scan, smudged and hard to read, but there it was, clear as daylight, the full boundary line with original survey coordinates. Signed off by the same engineer who had signed my closing documents back when we bought the place. But the kicker? Jamie held up a thin yellow folder, the physical one she'd picked up that afternoon from the county archive. This is the certified site plan from when your house was first built. Guess whose signature is on the HOA's override form that tried to amend it last year? I didn't have to guess. Laurel, she said. She submitted it as an update for consistency. But she's not a licensed surveyor. She doesn't have the authority to redraw anything, and there's no record of community vote or member notification, which, by HOA bylaws, she needed. I sat there staring at the documents like they were in a language I used to speak but hadn't heard in years. The whole time I'd been fighting them in the open, she'd been rewriting the battlefield. Jamie leaned forward, her voice quieter now. Tom, they built on your land using a false document. They knowingly submitted false material to the planning department. That's not just a civil dispute, that's fraud. And it hit me like a gut punch. I'd been trying to fight clean, thinking this was just a case of a misfiled boundary, maybe some laziness or arrogance. But Laurel? She wasn't sloppy, she was methodical. She'd altered the map, not just to get her pool built, but to erase the paper trail that said I ever had a right to that land. And because it came from her, from the HOA president, nobody questioned it. Not the contractors, not the board, not even the police. Because when someone walks into a room carrying a clipboard and talks with enough confidence, people stop looking at the details. But I don't stop looking at the details. Not anymore. I'd spent my whole career making sure people didn't drown because of bad data, and now someone was trying to drown me in it. I looked at Jamie and said, "We're going to bury her in her own paperwork." She smiled. "Now you're getting it." I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, that part had already come and gone, but because my brain wouldn't shut up. It just kept running through all the pieces over and over, like gears finally locking into place. The maps, the timelines, the signatures, the way she'd spun everything to make it look official. The whole damn thing was a house of cards built on bad documentation and her confidence that no one would ever bother to check. She'd built her plan on silence, which meant the way to take her down was through noise. Jamie and I met again the next day. This time, I brought a legal pad with everything broken into sections. What we had, what we needed, and who we could lean on. It started with the paper trail. We needed certified copies of the original parcel maps, the site plan from when the neighborhood was first developed, and every alteration Laurel had filed over the past 2 years. Jamie had already pulled most of it, but we wanted it double certified. Couldn't leave room for any misinterpretation. Next came the metadata. Jamie called in a favor from an old colleague who worked in the city's GIS department, not someone high up, just a tech who processed file submissions. She got him to verify that Laurel's digital overlay didn't come from the official record, but from a community planning software suite. Basically, something anyone could mock up in PowerPoint if they wanted. Then there were the bylaws. HOA rules are like flypaper. Everything sticks and nothing's clear, but Jamie knew how to read them. And according to those rules, any modification of shared use boundaries had to be approved by a full membership vote with documented majority approval. Laurel hadn't even held a vote. She just declared it passed and filed the papers like she had a rubber stamp for reality. I pulled in Carl next. Carl Redden, former HOA president, now retired, spends most of his time growing tomatoes and watching old westerns. He's the kind of guy who wears suspenders unironically and knows exactly how many screws are in his shed door. I brought him some homemade jam Elaine had put up last fall, sat on his porch, and laid it all out. At first, he didn't want to get involved, said he was done with HOA drama, but then I showed him what Laurel had submitted, the forged overlay, the erased vote history, the boundary lines that made it look like my land had never existed. He stared at it for a while and said, "That woman's treating Stonebrook like it's her own kingdom." Then he disappeared into his garage and came back with a cardboard box full of meeting notes, hand-drawn plats, and original HOA documentation from when the subdivision first broke ground. Inside that box was a printed copy of the original boundary map, dated, signed, and attached to a letter from the county confirming the borders. It lined up exactly with mine. We now had every major version of the same data, old, new, fake, and real, and they all pointed to one thing. Laurel had overstepped in every way that mattered. So we started building the case. Jamie drafted a letter of intent, not a lawsuit, not yet, but the kind of legal shot across the bow that makes people sweat through their collars. We included copies of the certified documents, photos of the property damage, and a breakdown of the HOA bylaw violations. We made it clear, cease construction immediately or face a full civil action for fraud, destruction of private property, and abuse of authority. We sent a copy to the HOA board, a copy to Miguel, and a very polite version to Officer Kemp, just so he wouldn't be caught flat-footed when this thing blew up. And then we got to work on the membership. Jamie put together a flyer, simple, clean, and devastating. It had a side-by-side comparison of the real and fake maps. It had the bylaws Laurel had violated, highlighted in yellow. It had a quote from the county GIS office confirming that the HOA's file wasn't recognized, and it had one sentence in bold red letters: "If they can do this to one homeowner, they can do it to you." Carl helped us hand-deliver them door to door. Not everyone answered. Some just took the paper with a nervous smile. Others, especially the ones who'd been iced out by Laurel before, invited us in for coffee and started digging out their own HOA violation letters from the past year. The neighborhood was shifting. You could feel it. Laurel had built her power on the assumption that nobody would ever push back hard enough or long enough to really matter. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. It started small. We weren't trying to make a scene, not at first. The goal was simple: stop the build, expose the fraud, and take back my land. But the thing is, when people feel like they've been steamrolled long enough, even a little resistance can turn into a movement. First, I printed out big color versions of the parcel maps, real one versus Laurel's fake, and laminated them. Jamie helped me design a board that I stuck right outside the fenced section of my yard, facing the street like a protest sign. Construction halted due to fraudulent HOA documents, property dispute under review. Underneath that, 2 maps side by side, one stamped by the county, one submitted by the HOA. Laurel hated it. 2 days later, she filed a complaint that I was defacing the community aesthetic. But this time, I was ready. I filed an immediate response, cited HOA Rule 4.2.7 about temporary signage during legal disputes, and copied the whole board by email. She didn't get the sign taken down. Then came the email blast. Jamie had pulled the public email directory from the HOA records request we filed. Every homeowner, every alternate. We sent out a clean, no-frills message. To the members of Stonebrook Valley, the HOA board, led by Laurel Jennings, has submitted altered and unapproved parcel data to justify construction on private property. We are in possession of certified records proving the boundary violations and are preparing legal action. We invite you to review the documentation at Dropbox link and attend a special session to vote on temporary suspension of all new HOA-led development projects until this matter is resolved. And we gave them a date. Carl helped us book the small room at the local library, not the clubhouse, because Laurel had conveniently declared it closed for scheduled maintenance. When the day came, over 30 people showed up. Some curious, some pissed off, a few nervous and trying to stay neutral. Jamie brought the receipts, printed binders for anyone who wanted to flip through the originals. Carl opened the meeting with a short speech about why the HOA was supposed to work for the residents, not rule them. And I told them my story, not just the survey lines and the ripped-up yard. I told them about the cops showing up, about watching a decade of work get chewed up by bulldozers while I was told to stand aside, about how Laurel smiled at me like I was a child who didn't understand grown-up things. It wasn't a rant, just the truth. But you could feel the room change. Afterward, one of the newer residents, Mark Cabot, fresh out of grad school, I think, stood up and said, "Why didn't we vote on the pool? I didn't get a notice." He wasn't the only one. Turns out Laurel had quietly streamlined the vote process by using proxy signatures from previous meetings, except most of those proxies weren't specific to the pool project, just general attendance waivers. Jamie explained the difference and people weren't happy. Miguel must have heard the wind shifting because the very next morning his crew didn't show. Just didn't show. No machinery, no workers. Only a quiet, half-finished trench and some sad plastic fencing blowing in the wind. That same afternoon, I got a call from Officer Kemp. He was polite this time, real polite. "Mr. Beckett," he said, "just wanted to let you know there's been a pause in the site activity. HOA has advised they're reassessing property documentation." I said, "You mean after they built on land they don't own?" Silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Just passing along the update." After that, we hit Phase 2. Jamie helped me file a formal complaint with the county about fraudulent submission of documents. We attached every piece of evidence: maps, metadata, conflicting versions, timeline, signatures, the whole mountain. The county clerk flagged it for expedited review. And now Laurel had a bigger problem than just me. Word started spreading. That flyer we'd passed around, it ended up on the Stonebrook Next Door page, the neighborhood Facebook group, even a few windshield wipers. Somebody started a petition to review HOA leadership practices. Not us, just a random neighbor who'd been fined last year for leaving their trash bin out overnight. People started talking, not just about the pool, about everything. The new fees, the sudden landscaping restrictions, the warnings taped to doors. Turns out a lot of people had quietly swallowed their frustration, thinking it was just them. But now they were all connecting the dots. And every one of those dots led straight back to Laurel. She tried to push back, of course, sent out a glossy letter in the mail saying we were misrepresenting community intentions and jeopardizing neighborhood unity. It had all the usual buzzwords, but no one was buying it anymore. I walked past her house one morning and saw her standing in the driveway, staring at the laminated map on my fence. She didn't wave. I didn't either. Because we weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The official meeting wasn't even supposed to be about me. It was a quarterly HOA session, same one they always held with folding chairs, bad coffee, and Laurel seated front and center like a judge who'd forgotten her robe. They'd scheduled it last minute, probably thinking they could regain some control, steer the conversation toward anything that didn't include fraudulent maps or illegally dug trenches. Didn't work. The room was packed. I'm talking standing room only, and not the usual quiet, disengaged crowd who just wanted their dues to stay low and their lawns green. This time, people came with questions. Binders, highlighted documents. Even Carl showed up in a sport coat, which I'd never seen before in my life. Elaine sat beside me. Jamie was on the other side, flipping through her notes like a lawyer prepping for court. You could feel it in the air, not tension, exactly. More like readiness. Everyone was just waiting for the first spark. And Laurel gave it to them. She opened the meeting with her usual calm, clipped tone, thanked everyone for attending, talked about the progress being made on community projects, even mentioned the pool, carefully referring to it as the shared development underway in the common parcel. That's when I stood up. Didn't raise my hand. Didn't wait for permission. Just stood. "Are we going to pretend none of this happened?" I said. She looked up like she'd just noticed I was there. "Tom, please save comments until the open floor section." "No," I said. "We're not doing this scripted. Not anymore." I held up the certified parcel map, turned toward the room. "This is the map recorded with the county, the one on file. The one that shows the property they're building on is mine. It's right here, black and white." Then I held up the one Laurel submitted. "And this is a fake. It was submitted to the planning office using a non-certified overlay. Laurel erased boundaries, stripped metadata, and filed it under the HOA's name, without a vote, without review, without permission." Murmurs started in the back. Chairs creaked. Someone said, "Is that true?" Like they weren't sure they wanted the answer. Jamie stepped up next, calm, measured. She handed out copies of everything: the side-by-side maps, the metadata log, the county GIS statement, the excerpt from the HOA bylaws requiring a community vote. She didn't raise her voice once, but she didn't need to. The facts spoke loud enough. Carl followed. He had the original HOA site plan in hand, the one filed 20 years ago when the subdivision was first built. It matched my deed line exactly. And then he asked a very simple question to the board. "Can anyone here provide documentation of the vote that approved redrawing these parcel lines?" Silence. Laurel tried to speak, but Carl cut her off. "Don't deflect. We're asking for proof. Show us the vote. Show us the minutes. Show us anything that says the members of this neighborhood approved what you did." Nothing. That's when people really started asking questions. Why was I fined for not mulching my flower bed, but the HOA can dig a pool on someone's property without notice? How come we never got the newsletter about the pool until they'd already broken ground? Didn't you say last year we were in a budget freeze? Where's the money even coming from? Laurel tried to regain control, tried to steer the conversation, but it was like someone had finally cracked the dam. People weren't just mad about my yard, they were mad about everything. About the fines, the intimidation, the silence, about feeling like tenants in a neighborhood they owned. And then Jamie dropped the final card. She handed Laurel a folded letter and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "This is a formal notification that you are being referred for investigation by the county recorder's office. They've opened a review into your document submission practices." Laurel blinked like she didn't understand the words. Then she stood up, said something about adjournment and unfounded accusations, but it was too late. People were walking out, shaking their heads. Others stayed, demanding a vote to freeze all HOA-led construction until an independent audit could be done. That vote passed, easily. Afterward, she slipped out the side door without speaking to anyone. The next morning, Miguel's equipment was gone. All of it. The fencing, the trench liner, even the porta-potty. Vanished like it had never been there. A week later, Laurel sent a resignation letter due to personal reasons. And just like that, the Queen of Stonebrook lost her crown. No screaming, no cops, just the truth, laid bare, in front of the very people she'd counted on to stay quiet. And let me tell you, silence has never sounded sweeter. The trench grew back slowly. First the weeds, then the soil settled, and then, over time, things started to look like a yard again. It took months. I didn't rush it. That land had been dug up without warning, so I figured it deserved a little patience on the way back. Elaine and I replanted the birch closest to the corner. It hadn't survived the digging, but we found another sapling at a local nursery, something sturdy with a bit of a lean to it already. She smiled when we put it in the ground and said, "Looks like it belongs here." And she was right. I rebuilt the pergola too. Took me longer this time, mostly because I wanted to get it just right. I reused some of the cedar that hadn't splintered and added a few newer boards I'd kept in the garage, like a blend of the old and the now. Jamie helped me level the posts. Carl brought over a cooler and sat on the steps offering supervision, which mostly meant telling me stories from the early days of the neighborhood when everyone still borrowed sugar from each other. The HOA still exists, technically, but it looks very different now. New board, new rules, open votes, actual transparency. No more surprise violations, no more secret amendments, no more fencing popping up like invasive species. Laurel, haven't seen her since she moved. For sale sign went up 2 weeks after her resignation, and one day her windows were just empty. Someone said she took a consulting job in Nevada. Someone else said she was being quietly sued by another homeowner from a different neighborhood. I didn't ask, didn't care. Officer Kemp still patrols the area sometimes. He slows down when he passes my house now, not in a threatening way, more like someone trying to acknowledge something they can't quite say out loud. One time he even gave me a little nod. I nodded back. Not much else needed saying. People started waving again, not everyone, but enough. Some even asked for advice on getting their own property surveys updated, just in case. There's still a trace of what happened in the way folks talk about community projects now. More caution, more questions. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes I sit under the new pergola with a cup of coffee and watch the light move across the grass the way it used to, before the fences and the trenches and the noise. Elaine's got her herbs growing again in the old cedar boxes. The lavender came back stronger than ever. And every so often I catch myself glancing over at the edge of the yard, the slope, the birches, the spot where that sign once stood, and I just breathe. Not in relief, in peace. Because now, when I say, "This is my land," it doesn't come from fear or anger. It just is. It always was. And now, finally, everyone knows it.